Andrew, thanks again for your time. We're asking the question this morning about growth barriers. You were saying to me as we were preparing for this that part of the problem with growth barriers is people diagnosing the wrong problems.
Yeah, yeah, good. Look, I've this last week actually, I've had a number of conversations with church planters, various stages. So, a couple of months in, couple of years in, 5 years in. So, um, quite different stages and different sizes. 40 and up. And it's interesting. It strikes me again how important it is for us as leaders to bring a set of skills that we need to work on, skills like the doctor has, so the skill of diagnosing where things are at, the skill of then prescribing what the cure is, what needs to be fixed, and then the skill which perhaps the doctor doesn't actually quite have, but the skill of actually then enacting that prescription. So, the doctor just usually gives it to us. But yeah, it's interesting in conversations, very often that's a major task that us as leaders are involved in the planting process, in pushing through barriers. What is actually going on? What is really going on? What's stopping us? What's the barrier we've hit? Why have we hit it? That whole diagnostic thing is quite a skill, and it's easy to get it wrong. I think it's easy to misdiagnose and end up with the wrong solution, of course, because of the misdiagnosis, which can either be get you nowhere, or create a real problem, or create a theological problem, which is probably even worse. And so, yeah, it's a massively important thing. So, for instance, I remember in the very early years, we had people diagnosing some areas of our life. Why was church slowing at this point? And one of the comments that was made was because we talk too much about sin and hell and judgment. And people, they're a bit turned off by that, and it's hard to actually motivate people to want to come along and so on and so forth. Now, you can see how that could be one diagnosis, and there could be some truth in it. It could be a church is so obsessed about those things that every time someone comes, they get beaten up by condemnation and judgment. There's no gospel hope. But it could just be that the people who are diagnosing it are too sensitive, and the problem's not with the preaching, it's with the immaturity of the hearer, which means your cure for the problem, the prescription, is actually greater theological rigour and more persuasive engagement with those topics.
The exact opposite of what you would have done if you made the other diagnosis.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
So, that whole diagnostic thing is critical, which trades, of course, on theological education. We want to keep batting away about the importance of we're engaged in a very complex skill, and careful analysis is so much a part of what we do, which means it trades in the context of how we really do understand human nature theologically, how we understand the nature of the ministry we're involved in, where the power of God is. The other thing I'm hearing too is the danger of projecting. It's interesting as guys do their kind of analysis process. It's easy to get caught up into the trap of I do my analysis projecting my own feelings. I think we're plateauing because everyone's just so tired. Well,
When in fact you're the minister who's actually exhausted,
yeah,
so you're saying, yeah, we all need a break.
just
Yeah.
started a new work, everything's new, you're tired all the time because it's stressful. Everyone else is having a ball, and there might be a couple of people who are tired, and they're in your ear, and because you feel tired too, it connects, and you kind of, this is the problem. When actually, no, everyone's very pumped and excited, and you need to actually tap into that as well. Yeah.
Well, help us out, Andrew. If you were going to say to some young guy, listen, you've got to be a good diagnoser of the problems within your church, what sort of areas does he go or what sort of skills does he develop to be a good diagnoser, or what systems does he put in place so that he can be a good diagnoser of problems?
Look, we've got to be strong theologically. We've just got to keep banging away at that. We've got to do our diagnosis of the contemporary situation out of the context of a theological worldview, and so constantly reading theologically, considering historical theology, so that I'm not just caught up in my particular circumstance. We just got to keep batting away at that.
So having the right information is part of it, and being able to sort of critique fairly what's going on, or wisely. But I take it when you were saying, like, some people getting inside your ear, so to speak, and commenting that that a structure can help too. That you can have checks within the congregation itself. Does it have like having a good coach, or having a good parish council support, or I don't know. Help me out there.
Well, just to go further then. So. Lots of observation. I think we've got to be good at getting a feel for everything that's happening. So working hard at being people who observe, who are curious, who ask questions. I spend a lot of time just trying to tap into the vibe, the feel, what's happening with people more broadly than my particular network, so that I get out of the people I tend to connect with. So that whole observation process. Building a team, one of the things we work hard on is conflict, and we have very robust debates and discussions about what is actually happening, where the problem really is, and we push around on that hard. And so we work hard at not settling for the quick, easy answer. It's just because the facilities are bad. And we try and push deeper and see if there are other places, working hard at that context. But yeah, you're building a team of people who have got a growing awareness of the theology of what you're about. So on that, the team aspect, you need someone to engage with you, so it's not your projection, but they need to share the same theological foundations. Otherwise, their assessment will be very different of what actually is going on. Now, in a church plant scene, some of our church plants who parachute in, it's very hard in the early years to have that.
Yeah.
It then drives you to the outside connector. Someone like the mentor, the coach, who can ask you the questions and push you a little bit further than the surface analysis. Is it really that everyone is tired? Are they taking up tasks in other areas of their life? Or are they dropping the bundle everywhere? Has one of your key guys just become the president of the PNC at the school? Well, he's not too tired then. Are they travelling to the snow regularly? They're not too tired. So just asking the deeper, harder questions.
You've touched on things like building. Some people consider that to be a barrier, or style of ministry, or just tiredness in general. Are there some classic barriers that people talk about which you think are given too much emphasis? Some that people worry about all the time, but in your experience may not be as big as people think? Or are there some barriers that we really should, look out for, that are a bit below the surface, that people forget, that they become real barriers to growth, but they don't seem as obvious?
Yeah, look, in the recent weeks, the one that I think has not been given enough credit to is the spiritual issue. So that a number of our church plants have, they've grown fairly quickly early on. And as you analyse it, it's probably largely because they're picking up the low fruit. They're mopping up the person who's been waiting for church. They've not been to church for 5 years. They're looking for something. Bang, they connect in pretty quickly. You get some, obviously, transference on. So they've picked up the low fruit. They've grown quickly. They're starting to hit a plateau. You can identify some classic growth barriers, like the facilities, the way you're leading and incorporating people, the communication processes. You can pick up some of that aspects, but often what it boils down to is that people haven't developed convictions for gospeling. They've traded on the easy growth.
Yeah.
And you're now into the stage, once you hit those early barriers, you really are into the stage of, I've now got to bring the heat to this community about, there's only one life, soon be past, only what's done for Christ will last. That kind of heat and energy that comes from viewing the world through the gospel grid. And that's hard-working preaching, hard-working discipling, hard-working small group life. So I've noticed that's sometimes been overlooked. And it really just takes us back to the bread and butter of what we are about.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, yeah, look, there are all the classic barriers that the sociological barriers of a group that's been 50, 60, 70 for a while creates a skin.
Yeah.
You know, like the custard that's been sitting, and people bounce off. And you don't realise it. You've got lots of people coming in, but they're not connecting because this community's now created a culture that's not as... They want people to come, but they're not able to let go of their in-jokes and their familiarity and all that. You know, there's a big one.
So
the easy one to break that is just to start new services.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say then, so there are barriers then that you would say you'd expect to come along. So say the 50, the 60. What are some of the barriers that people that you should be looking out? People should be looking out for. Are there like numerical barriers that are pretty accepted now that are real stretch points?
Yeah. Look, if you just did a search on the internet for growth barriers in church, you would certainly find a lot of information. There's a lot of information out there. Yeah, the kind of 50 to 80 a barrier. 50 to 80 barriers, a classic one. The kind of 120 to 200 is another big barrier. The 3 to 400, 800, 1,000. They're the classic kind of barriers. And yeah, understanding the nature of group life at those dynamics will be part of the process of analysing what actually is it a growth barrier we've hit, because those barriers aren't rigid. It's not at 70 you hit it. You know, it could be 90 that you hit that sociological barrier of growth, or it could be 50 you've begun to hit it because you've sat there for a while. So it's a little bit more complex than simply, we've hit 70, therefore, which then you need the analytical processes to come in bear, and play all of that through and so on. Yeah.
So we want to be good diagnosers of the problem. We want to prescribe the problem. With that third element, applying the prescription.
Yes.
What sort of special grace, so to speak, does a minister have to do that?
Yeah, look, yes, good. This is my wife. She'd love to be mentioned. She bats away on this all the time. 3 skills that we need. We tend to only be good at 1 or 2 of them. We can analyse and we can prescribe. What I'm noticing is lots of guys struggle at the pushing out a strategic plan and enacting it in a disciplined way so that it actually does bring about change. And this, Kathy, my wife, she's very good at that kind of thing, and she's often frustrated as she moves around the place that they can see what's going on, but they just can't put it down into an action plan with a series of steps and then go and make that call that I'd said I would and work my way through the process. I think she's right. I think many of us have been drawn into ministry through the kind of intellectual processes of thinking into things, and we've not been the guys that have been the doers. And so recognising we need to grow in that skill, but also perhaps attract around us teams of people, men and women, that are good at that. Yeah. And getting alongside them. Typically it's the middle-aged woman who's brilliant at it. Do you know what I mean? I'm not...
No. Gosh, my house doesn't run anyway, according to my, organisational abilities. But I understand that, because one of the things, and maybe we finish on this, you're not just talking about necessarily transforming your own character, but where you have a deficit, being able to build in people who can bring that.
Yeah, exactly right. With all the cautionary things of there are, the theological dangers, certainly the higher level ones of analysing and prescribing. We do a lot of drawing in men and women to do the enacting, and we'll give a couple of these people who are very good at it to sit next to the minister and say, here's where you need to get to, let me help you work out the steps, and then let me help you either enact those steps or do them for you. And that's quite powerful. But building a team is obviously.
And if they don't listen, you set your wife on them.
Oh, Kathy's always there, just ready, unleashed.
Andrew, thanks very much for your time today, and particularly for such a complex issue. It's just great to hear about working through barriers. If somebody has a question, we've got a address coming up on the screen now. You can send it off to Andrew, and Andrew will do his best to answer it for you. See you next time.
Okay, thanks, mate.